Hey guys, Chelsea here. Now in this video, I'm actually going to be doing something I don't think I've seen many people do. I've not seen anyone do this, but I've seen a lot of people ask for this. But it's basically, I'm going to go through each campaign basically and say what faction, I think, basically ranking each faction, so all of these, from what I think is the most user-friendly to the least user-friendly. And what I mean by this is not which campaigns are the most user-friendly, which campaigns are the most unuser friendly. Basically looking at each of the unlocks that each faction does. So for example here on Allied Tunisia, basically looking through what the unlocks are for each faction and why, in my opinion, each faction has it easier. I'll be basically comparing the two. So basically you'll have a so I'll be comparing, say for example, Tunisia Allies against Tunisia Axis. So and basically saying which sides have it'll make more sense the more it goes on. But basically, I'm going to be going through and basically saying which factions are easy to play, which factions are harder to play, which factions are easy to pick up, etc. Now, I will say, of course, that honestly, if you do want to play this game, and if you're new to this game, start with either Normandy or Moscow. Start with either of these two campaigns. Really depends on which one you prefer, which style of combat you prefer. If you like, longer range, start with Moscow. If you like shorter ranged, but, more short ranged, but some distance, some long range, go for Normandy. Mostly if you're unsure, it really depends. If you have an interest in Normandy and you don't have much of an interest in Moscow, go with Normandy, and vice versa. Then I would say go try out Berlin and then try out Tunisia. Now, I would actually honestly say the best thing to do is probably to try out each faction. Have a game or two of each faction, and then decide on which one you're going to main. But these are, in my opinion, which ones are hardest to main, which ones are easiest to main. Basically, yeah. Anyways, let's start with number 8 and then move our way on to number 1. With number 8 being the hardest, pretty much the least user-friendly, the least noob-friendly. Coming in at number 8 is actually the Axis in Tunisia. Now, the problem with the Axis is just their equipment, really. It just sucks, okay? I'm sorry for all Axis mains, but the equipment for the Axis is not the best. And it pales in comparison to the Allies. Now, there are great weapons in here, don't get me wrong. The Carcano, for example, this Carcano is great. And I think this one's also pretty good. But the rest of the stuff, and the Kar 98K is fine. And you also get stuff like the Beretta M1, the MP40, and the Beretta M3840 too, which is basically, the M38. And you do get the MG34 at the end. But everything else is bad. You've got the unquestionable worst Axis weapon in the game. Exclude, of course, equipment cost weapons. You also get, a bunch of, recycled equipment. The Gavir 41, for example, the pre-war Kar 98K, the Kar 98K, the Shooting Cup, the MP28, the Drillin. As well as that, you don't get really a good SMG until the M1. And the M1 as well. That's probably your best SMG. And the M1's, it's a great SMG, don't get me wrong. The M1 is really good. I've picked it up a few times, it's really good. But, it's going to be your main SMG for the most part, because the MP40 is actually worse. From what I've used, the MP40 is worse. The OVP is essentially is a specialist weapon at best, and the Beretta, it's a Beretta, but it's going to be. But by the time you get the Beretta, you're going to have maxed out M1s. And as well as that as well, you don't get a good LMG really until the ZB. It's okay, but you don't get. But the MG34. I mean, to be honest, the ZB is much better than this abortion. But yeah, you don't really get many good weapons. As well as that, vehicle-wise, you don't get that many good vehicles either. I'm pretty sure this isn't that good. The tank they unlock at the beginning of the campaign, this thing, it's loud as fuck, and it's just pointless. You really don't get a good tank until you get to this, which is level 6. By this point, the Allies have an armoured car and the A13. Like the M14 and the later M13 are really the only good Allied tanks. This Axis tanks until you get to the Panzer IIIJ, and that's all the way at like level 26 or something like that. This tank destroyer is quite crap in terms of just how no machine gun. This really suffers for this thing. But yeah, really you're just going to be using stuff like and as well as this, like, I'm not really a big fan of the Carcano, but I understand why people like them. Like, it's not personally a fun weapon for me. I do prefer the cars. Apart from this Carcano is actually really good. Like, this one's really good. I'm not sure about that one. I've not actually used this. And, the Gavir obviously is the Gavir. This isn't that good either, if I remember correctly. I've used it, like, twice, and I was like, this isn't that good. But yeah, honestly, and another thing is, they dwindle in player numbers as well. No one plays Tunisia for the Axis. Anyway, like, I just have to say it. Anyways, that's good. I'm just going to say this is the easy number 8. It's a meme at this point, how much Tunisia Axis suffer. So yeah, easy number 8. Anyways, let's move on to number 7. Coming in at number 7 is actually Berlin. Now, the problem with is actually Berlin Axis, I meant. The problem with Berlin Axis is, well, everything they have, the Soviets have one better. Like, look at all of this Soviet equipment compared to the Axis equipment. Like, don't get me wrong, the MP40, MP35 and the Beretta are great weapons. Volkssturmgewehr, it was much better, but now it's worse. But the Soviets just outclass the Axis in every single department. When the Axis get the Volkssturmgewehr, the Soviets get their first drum mag. The MP308 is an awful starting. It's probably, I think I put this as the worst starting SMG as well. This thing it's a pile of arse. This thing is god awful. It's slow firing, and the worst thing is, it's up against PPS 42s, and the PPS 42 I put was the best starting SMG. So yeah, in terms of assault capabilities, you're going to be lacking in close range. But what about mid range? Well, you do actually have some good mid range options, mid and long range options. The VG2, the Gavir 43, and eventually the FGs. But the problem is, by the time you get to the FGs, the Soviets are going to have, AVTs and all of that. They're going to have their drums already. So you're going to be, and really the only places, these things, the FGs, they dominate in close range and long range. But the VG, compared to the stuff like the PPDs, which are, again, I know it's comparing a rifle to an SMG or an LMG to an SMG, but there's a huge difference between the two. Really, the only thing the Axis have going for them is the machine guns. The MG34, MG42, and the MG34 with the palindrome drum are all 10 out of 10 machine guns, and outclass anything the Soviets have. The Soviets, they have some decent LMGs. Don't get me wrong, they do have decent LMGs, but really the only upside the Axis have is that they've got insanely good LMGs, which is what's really stopping them from getting in. Another thing that's stopping them is their tank play. They have some really good tanks, like the Panther G and the Tiger. But in terms of air as well, like, I'm not really, like, they've got some good air as well, like the Focke-Wulf, the Stuka obviously is fine. And you've got stuff like the BF-19, you've got the ME-410 as well. You've got some good planes, but compared to the Soviets, I think, have better planes as well. So you don't even have the air advantage. Other than that, it's just really, they've got great weapons, but the problem is they've only got a few great weapons, and the rest of their weapons are just awful. Like, at the moment, like, aren't up to the standard, basically. Like, if you can afford SG-42 death stacks, then it could be potentially the most powerful. But I'm taking this from like an average player perspective, and they're going to be mostly using stuff like VG2s, Gavir 43s, Car 98Ks, MP40s, maybe MP35s, you know, and they just don't compare to what the Soviets have. And on top of this, Berlin is one of the most, you know, user unfriendly. Like, this is a really unbeginner friendly campaign, and yeah, you've got recipes for disaster, really. Anyways, let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6 is actually the Allies in Tunisia, aka the British/Americans. Now, they've got the exact same thing they've actually got it kind of the same way as well. Like, their LMG play is pretty good. The Bren Mark 1, the BAR, this is not that good. And they've got some good anti-tank weapons with the Piat. They've also got some really good, you know, bolt actions and semi-autos. And some really good, you know, SMG. So why are they only at number 6 instead of number, say, for example, number 3 or something like that? Well, the problem is, the way the Tunisia's campaign is structured really does not benefit the Allies. Well, it doesn't benefit anyone, really. Like, compared to some of the other factions, they suffer just on design, really, as well. Like, they've got the good they've got the weapons, they have the weapons, they have the good weapons, they have the good, you know, they've got decent vehicles, you know, Hurricanes. I think, do you have a Spitfire? I think there might be a Spitfire somewhere around here. Yeah, there is a Spitfire. You've got the Hurricane, you've got the Spitfire, you've got, you know, the Thompson, you've got the P4, you've got the P38, you know, you've got the Crusader, you've got the, you know, the SMLE, you've even got the BAR A1, not A1, the A2. So why do they suffer? Well, it's just really that their stuff is really well spread out across their campaign. Their really powerful stuff is really spread out. Engineers at level 9. You can see, like, semi-autos until level 12, which, you know, it's fine. I mean, they get a really good SMG at level 14, obviously. But you can see here how much, you know, look at some of these stuff, you know, are just wastes of levels. Like, you know, some of these, you know, you don't really get, like, obviously, you know, you get great stuff, don't get me wrong, you get amazing stuff in between, you know, with a lot of this stuff, but, you know, it's hampered by Tunisia's progression, which is something that other factions don't actually have, which is why Tunisia is coming in at number 6. There's also, of course, the low player numbers and just that. Anyways, let's move into number 5. Number 5 is actually Axis Moscow. Yeah, I can't speak today, sorry. But again, they've got the problem that their great stuff is locked behind a massive grind wall. Like, look at this: Gavir 41, ZH29, which is pretty good as well. The Sniper MKB, the MP35, the Beretta, you know, that Beretta, the MG34. They get stuff, really good early stuff like the MG13 and the MP38 and eventually the MP40. You know, and the Car 98K, obviously because of Moscow's pace, you know, Car 98Ks and bolt actions, you know, they last for much longer. But again, compared, you know, they only get all of their good stuff in the late campaign. And they're up against the Soviets, who get their stuff, who get more powerful stuff a lot earlier, which is why they're coming in at number 5. But the only reason they're coming in at number 5 is because they're over the Allies in Tunisia. Is that obviously, what's it? I can't speak anyways. But the faction, you know, they play quite well, and they can use their, you know, discounted stuff, you know, like the VZ and the Car 98K. They can use this stuff until very late because of how slow paced Moscow is. Whereas Tunisia, you know, some of the early stuff, you know, if you're up against a Sweatlord, obviously if you're up against Sweatlord in any campaign, you're fucked. But you've got more options in an early game. Moscow player has more options than an early game Tunisia player, which is why I think this is more user friendly. Anyways, let's go on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is actually Allies Normandy. Now, Allies Normandy is by far the most played campaign. However, it is not the most user-friendly campaign. Now, the main problem is SMGs. You do not get a good SMG until rank 22. Level 22 is the first time you get a good SMG. The M3 is crap. The M3A1 is crap. Like, they're bad SMGs. And you can say, oh, upgrade them. Yeah, but again, you're going to be outclassed at close range by the Axis, who will be using SMGs, which will be much more superior, even if they are. And even though you can put the just upgrade, if the Axis player upgrades theirs are still going to outperform yours. The only thing they really excel at is long range in the early campaign. You know, with the number 4, the Grand. The Carbine's not that good. You know, so they get like number 4 on the Grand, which is really good. But it's really until you get the M2 Carbine, the Sten, the Lancaster, the BARs, and obviously the Bren. The Bren's the Bren will probably be your close ranged weapon until you get the BAR, in which case you can probably just use the BAR, because the BAR is much better in close range than the Bren. But the Bren's still really good. The only reason they're not low, even though they have a lot of specialized weapons, is that they get some really good early game advantages, like the Garand and the Carbine, which compared to other campaigns like Moscow and like Tunisia, which also have to wait for their good stuff. Yeah, and again with Berlin as well. Well, most campaigns actually have to wait for their good stuff. You know, whereas you get the number 4, which is probably the best bolt action in the game, and then you get the Garand and the Carbines, which are really good, and these will hold you until the rest of the game. Then you get like the M2 Carbine, which is really good, the Garand with the grenade launcher. You know, it's just you just get a lot of good stuff with the Allies. And that's not even talking about the tanks. Now, tank play-wise, obviously, they get stuff like the... Jesus Christ. The Stuart's not that good for a starter tank. The Scott's more of a specialised vehicle, and the Sherman is fine. It gets outclassed by the Panther 4s, but it's fine. But what they lack in tank play until they get to level until they get to level 20, where they are not this disgusting piece of shit, they will make up for in air power. Like you'll see here, like obviously I'm using this there's this P47 here, but you'll get like the A20, you get the P51, you get these things, the P38s, and you also eventually you get this ugly motherfucker. These are fighters. These are classed as fighters, yet in reality they're bombers. They're more like bombers. Whereas this is just dirty. This thing is just dirty powerful. So, really, it's a really good plane, but man, this thing is dirty powerful. Yeah, not really much to say about this. Other than, the Allies, when they excel, but most parts they have to work to excel. Anyways, let's move on to number 4, I think. Wait, yeah, number 3, my bad. Number 3 is Moscow for the Allies Moscow, not the Axis. Now, the main thing is they get a lot of stuff early. They get a drum mag at level 11, and then you get the PPD and the PPSH. They have some really powerful stuff as well, like the Winchester here, a semi-automatic sniper. Before they even get a semi-automatic weapon, they get like the SVT-38, the SVT-40, the AVS, and the only problem is they don't really get a good LMG until level 20, which is the DP, which the DP's fine, but the Madden's not that good. And, you get, but even then, like, the Winchester's not bad, it's not bad, but people literally have said it's the best rifle in the game, so take it with a grain of salt. The SVT and the AVSs are really powerful. There's a reason why, the AVS is still in Berlin. I mean, there's a reason why this thing has even been nerfed in Stalingrad before it even came out yet. And, the elephant in the room, the PPSH 41 at level 30, which will just cut through anything. Yeah, very good, very, very strong faction, but not number 1, or not even number 2. So, let's talk about those. Coming in at number 2 is Normandy Axis. Now, Normandy Axis really has the same problem with Berlin Axis, as in the scale, the ceiling scale is very high with the FG42 and the FG, and of course, later stuff like the NG3442, and of course, this thing. But what it has over its counterpart is actually just a reliable backbone of early game weapons before the insanely OP shit. You got the MP40, the MP34. The Beretta is kind of more of a situational weapon, but it's still usable. And you get stuff like the Gavir 43 as well, and the Maz 36. You're also not going to be content. Also, the faction is much stronger in the early game than the faction it's up against, the Allies. It doesn't really suffer much, in planes as well. It's got some good planes like the Junker 188 and the ME 410, but later, you also get stuff like you got the BF 110 as well, which is pretty good. You got the BF 109s and the Fokker Wolf 190, which is, these are all really good. These are all really good, planes. But, and they don't really compare to the tank plane. Now, obviously, of course, the elephant in the room, the Panther. But you even get some really early... the Puma's really good early game if you can use it correctly. If you don't use it correctly, you're going to have a hard time. Panzer IV is a really, really good tank. And you unlock at level 15. The H is just an improvement over the 4. Over the 4J. And you just get a lot of good stuff with Normandy Axis. Now, the reason it's not number 1 is there is a bit of a, the early period, the early part is a bit shaky, but once you get the ball rolling around the mid game and especially in the late game, you outpower the Allies. So really, it's more of a it takes a bit of time, but it's not as bad as something like, say, it's not as bad as something like Berlin Axis or Tunisia Axis or Moscow Axis. Basically, I would say this is the strongest Axis faction, and that's not even. And also, you've got the FGs. Obviously, you've also got this, which is just dirty powerful. Like, this thing is evil. Like, how powerful this is. I love this thing, but man, this thing just blows people away. Anyways, that's enough with talking about why Berlin is really good. Not Berlin, Normandy Axis is really good. Let's talk about number 1. No contest. Just no contest. Number 1, it is got to be Allied Berlin. Now, the reason being why Allied Berlin is so user-friendly and so good for new players, they don't have, like, most factions, like, I'm just going to use Axis, they have a power creep at the late game. They get more powerful the further on in the campaign they get. Normandy as well. Normandy, more powerful as it goes on. Moscow kind of remains the same, but, their late game stuff really blossoms into another campaign. Same with Tunisia. With the Allies in Berlin, they start out overpowered and end overpowered. Look at what they get at the beginning. PPS 42, PPS 43s. These are, I would say, if these were in other campaigns, they would be top tier SMGs. But they are bottom tier SMGs here because it is Berlin. PPS with the box. Again, a top tier SMG in another campaign. But here, it's just a, it's a mid tier SMG. And it's not as good as the PPD or the PPS with the actual drum. Again, the PPS with the actual drum is dirty powerful. Like, this thing just kills infantry. And more to the point, look at all of this. You get the SVT, the AVS, the AVT, the sniper SVTs. These are all very powerful weapons. And yeah, the Mosin carbine and the Mosin rifle aren't the best. But they don't have to be the best. Because literally all you do is blitz with the PPS and that's it. And more to the point, you've got working LMGs as well. Like, you get the DPM and the DP29 and the DT29 as well as the DP27, which, again, Moscow didn't have. So really, they're a complete package in terms of infantry. But what about vehicles? Well, in terms of tanks, well, they get this and this really early on. And these things outclass pretty much every tank in the game, other than maybe, like, these things will beat anything. They'll beat Tigers, they'll beat Panthers, they'll beat anything. And these are only the basic tanks. The SU is pretty bad. But when you get this bad, this thing just is nasty. Is also pretty powerful. It's basically this, the T-34-85, but with more armor. So basically, you've got the T-34-85 with more armor with the IS-1. And what about planes? Well, with planes, you get just a bunch of, you've got a lot of really powerful aircraft. Like, you've got some multi-purpose, IL-2s. You also have some decent fighters. Like, you've got the Jag here, and you've also got the LA-5, FN, whatever the hell this is. And apparently, the best piston fighter in the war. And also you get, like, the IL, got some ILs, so, yeah. The IL-2 and the IL-10. So, yeah, you got a lot of really good fighters and bombers throughout the campaign. Which is why they're easily coming in at, number 1. And honestly, I wasn't taking into account premium squads, but this is a squad, you can just you can just go, if you have this squad, obviously, PPK, PPS, PPS. Anyways, I'm going to end the video here. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments about what you guys think is the most overpowered faction, and I'll see you guys in the next video.